I'm Jim Collison and live from the Gallup Studios here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Theme Thursday, Season 3, recorded on August 17th, 2017. Theme Thursday is a Gallup webcast series that dives deep into the CliftonStrengths themes, one theme at a time, and today's theme is empathy. If you have questions, comments, or contributions during this webcast, we do have a live chat room that's available for you right below the main video window. If you just go down there, bottom left-hand corner is a little button that says Login. Choose that. Choose the guest account. Take out the guest name. There'll be a guest and some numbers. Take that out, put your name in, hit submit, and we'd love to have you join us in the chat room. If you've already logged in as a guest, that's okay. You just go down there and do it now. It'll log you in. That way we can call you by your name and not call you a guest. We appreciate you being here today. If you're listening to the recorded version and have questions about custom strengths coaching solutions for small, medium, or large organizations, we do that as well. You can send us an email. Really, it says an email for all your questions, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strength Center, just gallupstrengthcenter.com for all your CliftonStrengths coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video now downloadable and streaming audio for offline listening, as Micah discovered today. You can just stream any of these programs that we do. All that information is available at our coaches blog. Just go to coaching.gallup.com. Micah Liebert is our host today. Mike is in a new location with new bandwidth. We can see her. She's clear. Welcome to another Theme Thursday, Micah.
Thanks, Jim. Great to be here.
Good to have you. We have a really interesting topic today in empathy. I think, Micah, this may be the most misunderstood and maligned theme that we have for whatever reason. I get questions about it all the time. So I am in season 1. We had Danny Lee on, and he said he was bringing sexy back to empathy, and we did a great job. So if you haven't watched season 1, you might want to do that. If while you're at season 1, just watch season 2 as well. You can do that afterwards. But Micah, today we want to clarify some things. We got a great guest, but let's talk a little bit about empathy.
We do. So empathy is definitely one of the questions I get asked about most commonly as I'm coaching folks. I think it probably shares a little bit of the same struggle that some other themes do, where the word is used all the time in over our vocabulary, but not necessarily used to define a group of talents like it is here. When we talk about empathy, we do mean some very specific things. If you take a look at that companion guide, let's just jump right into what we mean when we're describing the CliftonStrengths theme of empathy. Really, it is that ability to sense emotion. Often we'll describe empathy as having a sixth sense. You can touch, see, smell, hear. If you've got empathy, you can sense how other people feel. Now, you don't necessarily agree with every person's perspective. You don't necessarily feel pity for each person's predicament. That would be sympathy. But having the theme of empathy means you are where they are. You are picking up on what's happening. Oftentimes I'll hear from people with high empathy that they can just get a feel for an entire room. They can walk into a room and they can tell if the people in that room are disagreeing with each other, or if a fight has just broken out. They can sort of sense that. They can feel if somebody's having a great day. It's that ability to not just read and ask great empathetic questions, not just be curious about emotion, not even just care about emotion. Empathy is the ability to understand the emotion in the moment with another person. So because of that, you could say that you hear the unvoiced questions, the unvoiced concerns. You anticipate the needs of people. Oftentimes where other people tend to reach for the right words, you find the right words, but you also find the right tone. People are drawn to you because of this. You can help give them a voice to how they're feeling. And when you think about empathy as a leader, I think it's got some fantastic application. Really, at this point, we like to say, how do we stretch empathy beyond just a talent that you might have as an individual contributor? Think about growing that into maturity. How are you going to use it to lead others? In a moment, after I talk a little bit more here about empathy, we're going to get to hear from an excellent manager and a people leader in Josh, who's a really great leader of others. And I actually thought about Josh and what I know about him and his style of leading to talk a little bit about this. But I think that management or really great people management is about that intersection. You have to care equally about people and performance, is what we'll often say at Gallup. Empathy as a leader isn't just sensing or feeling how other people feel. It's feeling how other people feel in reaction to to their work, to their best position, to their accomplishments. I think as a leader, you can use empathy to have a little bit more of a targeted understanding of what you're sensing. So feeling emotion towards something. You might even consider the 5 clues to talent as a framework for really understanding how the people you're leading are feeling. So ask yourself, what brings other people flow, satisfaction, yearning? Pay attention to what really lights people up. What are their hot buttons? Pay attention to when are they doing better work because they're feeling more emotionally connected. And ask yourself how you can create great development, great collaboration that's going to lead you to improved performance. So you can see that you could be a fantastic manager without empathy. But when you think about empathy in that space of management that brings together people and performance, it really is a fantastic talent to really lean into and hone. So think about how you could improve upon that talent. If you are a manager or a leader of people, aim that emotional radar. That really is what you have. It's as if you have an extra antenna that's picking up on what other people are feeling. Aim that toward where is there the most ease, excellence, and enjoyment for the individuals who you lead. You could look for where the most powerful partnerships might be because of that, where there might be more efficiency. Also think about, what does it take for the people on your team to truly buy into an idea? And these are all things that without empathy, of course, you could ask, but with empathy, you might be 10 steps ahead of having to ask. You might be sensing it already. So then use that to then set up the conversation. Hey, I get the feeling that when you work on tasks that are very detail oriented, time seems to disappear for you. Is that true? Or, hey, I noticed that when you have to meet brand new people, you really tend to do a better job and you seem like you're really great at it. How does that feel for you? You can see how that ability to sense can really give you just a jump start, that kind of emotional connection and that relationship piece, what you're sensing, being able to fine tune that and really turn it into a conversation, validate it with the folks that you're leading. It'll help them understand, number one, that you're paying attention. And number two, that, hey, we don't all say these things out loud. We don't all communicate without words. And so being able to bring that empathy out of what you're sensing into a space of where you can talk about it with the people that you're leading is a really great practice. So ask yourself, when does your emotional antenna get the purest signal? Today, I am broadcasting for the first time from my new office with new Wi-Fi, and you can tell, I hope, that it's a lot better. So you can tell that today I've got a purer signal. So I think in sort of the same way, pay attention to when your empathy is getting the best bandwidth. Is it when you are with people you know really well? Is it when you are following a very clear goal? You're probably going to get some clues to that answer if you take a look at the dynamics of the other themes within your dominant themes. But really ask yourself and get curious. Maybe it's just simply when you're well rested or when you're working from a clean space. Maybe it has more to do with your great well-being. But again, that question is, when does your empathy really get that purest signal? What do you need in order to make sense of what you're picking up? So do you need to write it down? Do you need to talk to somebody you trust? How can you practice this every single day? Make sure it's something that you lean into and you really feed so that it can thrive. Finally, I've got a quote here about empathy. I think it's about empathy. In order to get this, I Googled, I think, emotional intelligence. Now, those two things are not the same thing necessarily, but I do feel like empathy has a great deal of emotional I guess you could say fluidity, or people with high empathy sort of speak and understand an emotional language really well. You could say that they are emotionally fluent. So in order to get this quote, that's what I looked up, but it's from Dale Carnegie. And it says, when dealing with people, remember you are not dealing with creatures of logic, but with creatures of emotion. It's such a good reminder of the validity of empathy in our workplaces, in our families, in our communities, in our projects. And being able to start even something very technical and something that seems very straightforward, being able to start that from a place of empathy is such a valuable theme. The last thing I want to talk about are those needs of followers. So we'll think specific to empathy. How, if you're a leader with empathy, what could you do on purpose to build trust, compassion, stability, and hope? First up is trust. And I think really, if you want to build some trust through empathy, practice reflection. Practice reflecting back to people what it is you're picking up. This might sound totally crazy, but one of the strangest surprises for me when I was expecting my kid, who's turning 2 today, so happy birthday, Simon, I realized, hey, I can't just think and have my thoughts transferred to him. It was realizing that he is a completely different being, and if I want him to understand what's going on in my head, I have to figure out a way to say it out loud and to get it into his head. I think sometimes empathy is the same way. You can't expect everybody else to be picking up on your emotion just because you're picking up on theirs. So practice a way that you can get that awareness out of your gut and into a way you can reflect it back to the other people. You might say things like, I'm sensing that you're feeling XYZ. Is that right? Or maybe even just, how are you really dealing with XYZ? A leader might use empathy to build compassion by showing up with the people who need support most urgently. You probably know who's struggling, and you can build compassion by being there, regardless of maybe where you plan to be. So it really is around practicing presence. And a leader with empathy might build stability by working emotional understanding into your agenda as a habit. That might mean finding questions that help other people do the same. So if you have a team meeting, you might be the one who's known for saying, hey, how's this going to make people feel? Or what's going to get people most excited about this? Or how is this going to apply to our vendors and what are they going to think? And finally, you might inspire hope through empathy by saying, you know what, when you discuss tomorrow, include feeling. Anytime you're talking about a goal, a change, even about team dynamics, when you're thinking about what's going to happen in the future, make sure that it's not just, I want to do 10 pull-ups by the end of the year, but that I'm going to feel stronger and more capable if I can do 10 pull-ups by the end of the year. This might seem like a very simple thing to you with high empathy. Of course, you would include emotion in your goals, but I think for people who do that on purpose, it makes a big difference. And if you don't have empathy and you're leading people who do, what a gift that you can give to be able to really inject future goals with a lot of emotion. So there you go, 10 quick minutes on the value of empathy specific to a leader. Now we get to actually meet a great leader who leads with empathy. Josh Foster is with us. Josh, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to get going.
I'm thrilled to have you here. Josh, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a data services manager here within Gallup. I lead currently 23 associates around the globe. I'm in charge of their development, their learning, teaching process, etc.
That's no small task. How does empathy show up for you in that role?
Yeah, I think a multitude of ways. When you think about anything that, let's talk process, right? So anytime that you work within a process, there's obviously process changes. And one of the reasons a process change might be successful is if you can understand and get buy-in from your team. And so the way in which I probably use empathy the most within my team is I'll look at, okay, guys, we have to change this process. And almost instantaneously, and even before I announce to them we have to change a process or we have to come up with a new way of doing things, I can sense how each person feels about that change. And if I can meet them where they're at and how they feel about that change, I can tailor my message and tailor my discussion with them in a more advantageous way. So it's definitely, you know, you think about how they're going to react and therefore you tailor your communication. That's one way. I mean, the other way that I really think about empathy a lot within my role, kind of holistically, is I meet a lot with my people. Only 6 of them are remote, so the rest of them are here in the same physical location. And when we meet either weekly or biweekly, we always start our meetings. It's a one-on-one meeting. I always start them with, what's on your mind? Whereas some managers might start with, how are you doing? Or what are you up to today? But I start out with what's on your mind because I want them to open up and talk immediately about, what is on their mind, how are they feeling, etc. And through that, I'm able to really gauge and understand their emotional state as we go into our developmental meeting or we go into a coaching session. And for me, it's all about, tell me what's on your mind. It might be something personal, it may be something work related, or maybe something interrelating the two. And through that, I'll figure out how you're doing. I'll figure out if you're happy, if you're sad, where you're at, etc. So I try to tune into that pretty hard.
I think that's a great example of giving yourself the purest signal, right?
Mhm.
Trusting that you're going to figure out how they're feeling. You don't have to ask that, but giving them that open door to say, "Here's where I'm at."
Mhm.
What a beautiful way for them to then kind of filter out what they're comfortable sharing with you.
Yeah, and I think the big thing with that is that sometimes people aren't necessarily that open right off the bat, like when you take over a team or something's bothering them. Um, but if you can say, what's on your mind? How are you doing? Um, as they start to talk, you can start to sense, are they hesitant towards this change? Are they super excited about it? And therefore, through that, listening and tuning into that empathy, you get really strong indication. You just start to feel it. And there's no other way to describe it. You just start to feel, okay, Bruno is not feeling good about this. Should I really rethink how I am allocating him? Should he be on this project? Should he not? Whereas maybe Mark is super excited about it, and therefore, maybe he should go with it. They don't explicitly say it, but they feel it, and therefore you feel it too.
So, do you find that you have to clarify that with them, or is it more of you trust your gut and then you can make the changes that you know to make?
Well, I trust my gut. I think a lot of it is sometimes that I get them. This sounds manipulative, but it's not that. I trust what I feel in my gut, but part of it is a recognition of what they're feeling in a vocal or in a public way. So I get them to bring it out onto the surface to where it becomes a mutual decision. Whatever decision we have to take, good, bad, or otherwise, it becomes a mutual decision on the course of action that we're going to take. So it's not me dictating what I should be doing. Even though I lead the teams, it's not me dictating. It's more, okay, together we came to this. And I emotionally felt that you were hesitant or that you were excited the whole way through, but now you know that too. Okay, now let's move forward together. So
Oh, I hope everybody caught that, Josh, because I think what you just said was brilliant. It's being able to say, I'm not using my empathy to direct other people. I'm using it to bring out what they don't have a voice for, what they didn't have words for. I'm using it to put us on more of a collaborative playing field so we can do this together.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you have to, right? I mean, it's. I guess when I think of leadership, there's only a certain amount of leadership where it really works when you're just straight dictating to people. But most often, the way in which I try to do my style. So earlier you mentioned like, what are your other strengths? One of my other strengths is woo, and so I want them to get on board with me, and I want them to get aligned with me, and I want them to like me. But part of that is recognizing how they're feeling and getting them to vocalize it so that we can be in agreement as we move forward and create a solid relationship, whatever it is that we're tackling together.
That's great. You mentioned before that maybe there's people who don't want to be that open. Have you ever felt like your empathy stepped over that boundary and tried to make people more open than they wanted to be?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
What was that like?
Well, I think you almost always happen to have so when you hire someone new, um, they're not necessarily comfortable with you yet. And one of the big things you have to think about is how you manage when you hire someone. Like, is it a fit for you as a manager, the person that you're hiring? And so one of the big things I think about is I'm really open and I'm really an emotional, not up and down emotional, but I manage through feeling in a lot of ways. Well, when someone is new, sometimes they're a little bit hesitant to open that door. And candidly, it depends on where they've come from. If they've come from an environment where it was very strict and rigid, then they're definitely not going to be emotional or allow their feelings to come out in a vocal form. So sometimes you have to say, all right, I'm going to take a leap of faith here. And I know what you're feeling. I know what you're feeling, Ashley. Like, this is what you're feeling. Am I right? What do you, and sometimes they'll like physically react to you in such a way, like almost move back away from you and say, I have no idea how you figured that out, but yes. But the moment it happens, it's like a eureka moment, right? Where it's like, okay, now we're in this together. Let's go forward. So yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to take that little leap, especially with new associates or new people that you're managing.
That's fantastic. Um, what do you think the biggest benefit of your empathy is to the people who you manage? What do they really get from you having empathy?
I think it allows me to, um, you know, how do I want to put this way? It allows me to fight for them on the same emotional level, without really having to have them ask for me to fight for them. I mean, in business, sometimes, you have to really advocate for your people, or you have to really defend them in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes they're just not comfortable with conflict, and sometimes they're not comfortable with bragging about a situation either. Both sides of the coin. And so, where I really think that I'm appreciated is sometimes they'll come to me and say, I don't know how you knew that I was really hesitant towards giving that feedback to another partner or to another manager here at Gallup. But thank you for taking that on for me. Or I didn't, yeah, I was really happy with what I did here, but I was going to keep that to myself. And now I appreciate you sharing it with my partners. And so sometimes it's like you have to understand the emotional aspect of that individual, of course, but then you have to say, how does it relate to their partners, to their colleagues? And that's where I think I probably use empathy the most.
That's cool. When you think about those four needs, so trust, compassion, stability, and hope, is there any one that for you stands out more than the others as being connected to empathy?
Trust, absolutely trust. Yeah, trust.
Are there things you do on purpose with your empathy to build trust?
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to meeting them where they're at emotionally.
Yeah.
And I mean, think about if you were having a conversation in your personal life, and whether it's with your mom, dad, brother, sister, etc., spouse, and if they met you where you were at every single time and they understood what you were feeling every time from an emotional perspective, how much trust that would build over time. And you think about it in the working relationship of people that you manage and lead, and you kind of think about it the same way is, okay, if I can meet you where you're at and I understand how you're feeling, I'm not going to place undue stress on you. I'm not going to get you worked up when you don't want to be worked up. I'm not going to level set with you when you don't need to be level set with. And so all of that is the foundation of trust. And getting them to say, I trust you, is a big emotional step.
Mm.
Josh, when you think about performance conversations, and I think empathy gets maligned in some areas because it feels soft to some people. They get it and they're like, "Oh, I can't have this. I'm a manager." As a manager, and as we think about performance conversations, how have you used that to your advantage, into those those that you're working with, to their advantage as well? So, in the context of performance discussions, how does it really help you?
I actually think when I was really early on in my career at Gallup, there was a senior leader who said, empathy doesn't really have a place in management, and he has since turned that around. But I kind of always just disagreed with that, and where it helps me the most, truthfully, is when I have to give hard feedback. Like when I have to be not rough, of course, but like, hey, we need a corrective action that needs to be taken here. We need to change our behavior. We need to change our output. We need to change our task, whatever. And specifically, you can tailor exactly how you should deliver a message, which is equally as important as what the message is, if you understand the emotional and feelings of that person you're delivering the message to. Because everybody knows this, but when you look at another human and you give off, or if they can't get past the emotional aspect of a message, they don't hear the message. They just stop. And so if you think about it, in the times where you have to kind of give rough feedback to someone, that's where, to me, it's okay, I'm going to really tune into exactly how they're feeling emotionally. And then from there, I know how to approach this messaging so that, candidly, the emotion doesn't block the message.
And you also have includer and developer in your top 5, and those have to fit nicely in as we think about plugging those into empathy as a manager, how much do you lean on those as well? And I'm particularly thinking about your developer. Do you consciously see that coming in and pairing those two together in these performance conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. Developer is I love all of my strengths, but it may be the one that I've had a crush on for the longest. But it's empathy and developer. Developers, obviously, any little sign of positiveness, any little sign of positivity, you feel great about, and you can remind that person. Most people think about that as like a tangible example. Well, I think about positivity or anything that's like improved upon maybe as an emotional example too, because I can sense it in my people. And so somebody might say, oh, so-and-so has typed in a formula or coded much better now than they ever were before. And that's their sign of developer, and that's how they fulfill their developer. But I look at it from an emotional perspective of, okay, all of a sudden now, one of my teammates is happy or stress-free when they're working on this. And to me, that's a development because now they're more comfortable with the process. Now they're more comfortable with the change that has taken place, etc. So is that clear?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, this season, as we've been working through each of these themes and the concepts of leadership, I think it's really, really important to understand that value in being able to bring those conversations and know, hey, in this environment, this is where I'm best. And I think, you highlighted sometimes bringing the hard message. And, oftentimes you have woo as well, which I think can actually struggle with the hard message at times because they want to be so influential. They don't want to say hard things that could strike against that influence, right? And somehow, how do you manage those two? How do you manage that woo, wanting approval, and maybe that empathy developer who's going to bring the truth, but in somebody's best interest? How do you manage that conflict?
Well,
or appear to be conflict.
Yeah. Candidly, I have a really good manager myself who has helped me spend a lot of time thinking about the balance within that, saying, because I got in a little bit of trouble early on in my career where I would want to hold on to someone for entirely too long or to continue to try to develop them because I knew the struggle they were going through. I could feel that emotionally and I knew they were trying. But then I would hear in the back of my mind, my dad has said this to me since I was 5 years old, don't mistake effort for accomplishment. And I think that's sometimes where, like, as someone who feels a lot, and you want to continually develop someone, and then you couple that with woo, where you want everyone to like you. My manager currently at Gallup has to come in sometimes and just say, hey, you know what, like, you've got to give them this feedback. And you do that enough and you figure out how to manage almost yourself. Like Drucker always used to say, manage yourself first. And you figure out how to manage yourself and go from there. So.
That's great.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Josh. I think you also bring in this concept of your manager. You're being managed by someone else as well, and that power of two, she being able to see that in you, and then kind of bring that to light. And and I have the opposite. So I have this woo and this high positivity and all these influencing themes. And I sometimes I can't sense how people are feeling. And people have to come to me and say, hey, Jim, they're feeling this way. you need to intercede. And so I think that as a manager, I think empathy can be a real superpower in being able to understand that the emotional well-being of each one of your employees, and then be able to respond and tailor the environment around them to make them the most productive.
Well, and I think that's sort of like, if you have really good partnerships with your fellow managers, you can leverage each other's strengths. So I partner with a manager named Greg, and I think the world of him. He's my peer in management, and we're both within data services. And he's extremely strong when it comes to strategic and futuristic items, where I'm probably not as strong. But there will be some times where he'll come to me and say, hey, I've got a guy on my team. Are you seeing anything with him? And I'll be like, yeah, I am. I was going to talk to you about that today, and we talk it through. And because we're aligned really, really well. We meet every day. And so in a way, he kind of relies on me to say, are you feeling anything from my team as it relates to your team that will help me address items on my team? And conversely, I work with him to say, like, where are we going? Like, do you see how this might play out, this process, this strategy, etc.? So I think he knows to leverage empathy and developer within me, and I know his strengths and what to leverage and develop or leverage and think about within him. And I don't know, it's kind of fun. It's a lot of fun. So
I love that example of what empathy can do with a peer in that sort of peer-to-peer relationship. You also mentioned you having empathy and a great manager who can help you with that. As somebody who has empathy, what do you feel like you need from your manager?
I think trust, of course, but one of the things I struggle with is, and this is kind of ironic considering I'm on this webcast talking to people, but I sometimes struggle to vocalize what I am actually feeling or saying, or how I feel about my team. So like, obviously my manager's in charge of our entire division, and she might say something of the nature of like, you know, she's very analytical. So she'll say, I need numbers that prove they're doing good, they're doing bad, they're improving, they're becoming more efficient, etc. And I might be able to say, I can get you those numbers in time, but initially we're much better off, or initially we're not better off. And we have that candidness back and forth. Where sometimes like I can just say, what, the team is starting to shift. I can feel the shift in their attitudes before they recognize it, or I can feel the shift in their production or their relationships with people that maybe they are partnering with throughout the organization before we can quantify it. I can feel it. And so sometimes I just have to tell her, and she's totally open to this. She's the most wonderful manager in the world, but it's sometimes where it's like, I can feel this. Give me a few weeks and I will get you the numbers and we can prove what I feel. And she's learned to trust that. And I have too, but she has too. So
It's like, it's not just trust, it's trust of the gut.
yeah.
I love that because, you know what I think is interesting is I'm not sure there's anything in the definition of empathy that talks about getting your feelings out. It's not an influencing theme. It's a relationship building theme. So it is a lot about what are you sensing? And that might be great for people to know that even perhaps how do you help somebody with empathy? How do you manage somebody with empathy? Ask for, what are you sensing? Just like Greg does with you, or just like if you've got a really great moment where maybe everybody else is looking for data, but you've got a gut feeling. Maybe that also means give people permission to fail.
Yeah.
Has your gut ever been wrong?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it has. But I think what's more important about it than it being wrong is recognizing the situations in which it has the susceptibility to be wrong. So, like for instance, I'm very rarely am I wrong about how people are going to perceive a process change, because I understand process and the way in which we work within Gallup really, really well. So I'm really tuned into that. Conversely, though, I know that I might struggle in how people perceive other changes or other areas of our organization because I'm not as in tune with those factors. So I guess what I'm trying to say there is like, I know where my core competencies and where my knowledge rests. And within those realms, I'm very rarely wrong within, feeling what people feel or using my empathy. But I would be the first one to admit I am wrong quite often. Well, not quite often, but I'm wrong enough of the time to know I'm wrong in the areas I don't necessarily have an expertise in.
Is it expertise? Is it maybe also just proximity to the people? I wonder if there's just some of that being able to sense.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. That's what I've always thought it probably would be, is like, okay, there's certain people that I'm just not seeing and emotionally making contact with every single day or even once a week. And therefore I don't have as good a gauge on what that is.
Oh, and back to your story with Greg with futuristic and strategic, very different themes. And again, both of you are great managers. Both of you, we have data to prove you're great managers. But what a fantastic example of being able to care about people in different ways. Your empathy can pick up on what's going on, and with the people that you're with, probably predict what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Whereas his futuristic strategic can think about it and
Mhm.
doesn't need the gut feeling, but can maybe imagine things that are a little bit further, a little bit more ambiguous.
Yeah.
How cool.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, you have to have a great partnership with complementary strengths, and the more you use them, it's like there's a multiplier effect the more you use them. So
What does empathy look like in your personal life?
so I'm recently married. I'm celebrating my first anniversary, our first anniversary on September 24th of this year.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah. So it's been kind of interesting in that, as anyone might know with their spouse or their partner, sometimes that spouse or partner might not want to actually talk about something or might not actually want.
Has it
Um,
taken you almost 12 months to figure that out?
well, now figuring that out and acting on it's much different. And having the patience to say, all right, she'll talk to me when she wants to talk to me because I can sense something's wrong or I can sense something's really exciting. But like in both cases, like when something's wrong, it's almost like, it's an onion. You got to peel back the layers. But empathy, like I can feel it. I know something's wrong. And it's so hard to just wait and wait and wait until something like when we're able to actually talk about it. Conversely, when she's really excited about it, I've almost done the same where I've said, like, you're really excited about this, aren't you? And she's like, hey, thanks. You just ruined that for me because like you totally called me out on that. Like I was excited about it. But I was excited to tell you about it, but you already sensed it. And so now like that gets into an entirely different discussion all in itself. That's primarily with my wife. But I mean, yeah, I was kind of always the person, growing up where in our personal life, like a little bit of therapist, I guess, in a way, but like people would come talk to me and I was really, really close with a lot of people. And I don't necessarily have relator all that high. So, my certain people would tease me and say, well, yeah, you get to know them. They fall in love with you or they really like you, etc. And then you don't actually care about them after that. Well, that's my woo and my empathy combining together, but not necessarily the case. I've had a lot of friends for a long time. But yeah, no, I mean, personal life, I use it all the time. And I just think about like my wife the most and some of the times where it's like, you can sense what she feels or whether happiness or uneasiness, etc.
Josh, has she taken CliftonStrengths? Do you know her top 5?
Yeah, what's funny is we were walking into the gym last night and she's like, my top 5, right? And in that moment, I wonder if she sensed how uneasy I felt. But yeah, so she is activator, achiever, learner in input, and I want to say the last one's strategic. She's going to watch this and I'm going to know
kind of
I got it right.
but kind of a doer thinker,
Yeah.
action oriented.
Yes.
Let's get stuff done. I'm happy when I'm most productive.
Yes.
Type, right? That type of person.
Yeah. I have all the feels in our relationship. She has all the do's.
Yeah. Well, she actually gets stuff done.
Well, I mean, I get stuff done too, but it's very much like sometimes I have to pull the emotion out of her at some point.
Yeah. Well, or it's just not as important, right? In her thinking, hey, the emotional aspect of this just isn't important. In fact, sometimes it probably gets in the way. So I'm going to suppress it a little bit so that if I don't have to deal with it, I don't have to go through the barriers. I'm not wasting time thinking about it. And so you're probably really good for her. Maybe the first time that she's had someone who can kind of read that emotion in her. And it's maybe a little uncomfortable to start with.
I would say she's much better for me than I am for her, but I totally, yeah.
Nice. Good recovery. Well, it's interesting. I think, Micah, you and I have been doing this a long time now, and I think we've been talking about in your marriage, and in managing and in marriage is very similar. There's very similar. You're working into this partner, and there has to be certain things that have to happen in order for this partnership to work. And then you introduce children, and now you really have management. And so I think oftentimes, I think I've said this before, if you really want an indicator of how someone's going to manage, look at how things are going sometimes at home, and you can get this, or how they're dealing with their kids, and you can get this real good insight to the way it's going to be, or the way it could be at work in its truest form. And so I don't think you can separate those two. A lot of people are like, oh, my home life and my work life. I think as a manager, they blend together. Josh, I imagine as you're working together in your partnership with her, there are certain things that happen that feel a little bit like work. In some of those conversations, different conversations, but you guys are still trying to get things done together, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of that role.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and in full transparency, we own a business together. Like, she's an entrepreneur, so it's very much like we have to work together. We have to find the balance. And so there's not really hardly any separation between work and personal life, and kind of all that balance. So.
Yeah. Do you feel like she trusts your empathy at this point?
It's funny. So she manages, we own a bakery here in Omaha, Sweet Magnolia's Bake Shop. That's a shout out. So she manages a team of like 10 people, right, in the bakery. And sometimes I'll go to her and I'll say, hey, one of our employees wasn't feeling good this morning. I only had an interaction with them for probably 5 minutes. And I immediately could sense, so-and-so is off. And we'd be talking about it, and she's like, what are you talking about? I'm just going to tell you they're off. And it's happened a multitude of times where maybe 2 or 3 days down the road, that employee has come up and said, hey, do you guys have some time to talk privately? And it's like, okay. And so the interesting thing is, I think she's learned to say, it's weird, we talk about, you can just walk into a room or walk into a setting and instantly know if somebody is amiss or something's going on. I think she's learned a lot, like my fellow managers have almost learned, that I can do that. People with empathy can do that. If they really practice their strengths, they can walk into a room and say, there's certain people here who are uncomfortable, or they're not feeling the greatest from an emotional standpoint. And then you just have to learn to trust it. It's hard to trust it, but you have to learn to trust it.
Well, and probably the best way to build trust in other people with it. Do you come right out and say, hey, so-and-so's off? Or do you need to have a trigger word of, hey, let's talk about what's going on?
With my fellow managers, I can just go straight up to them and say, hey, so-and-so is not doing good. Have you drilled into that at all? Do you have any idea what might be going on, etc.? Because we're more direct with maybe how that needs to be approached. On a personal side, it's a little bit more, I'd say a little bit more, like you have a little bit more hesitancy towards it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's because, like Jim talked about, it's the fusion of personal and business, and our personal and partnership. But you just have to be so much more aware, because at the end of the day, you have to have a very personal relationship, and you get to have a very personal relationship with this person. But with your fellow managers, yes, you have a personal relationship with them, but you're not going home with them at night. You're not, you're not waking up with them. You're not eating dinner with them, etc. So it's maybe a little bit not as direct. But in both cases, I mean, my goodness, they're both, my personal, or my colleagues are wonderful about it, and my wife is incredible about it too. It's really fun when your partners can realize that you have a strength that you yourself you're proud of.
Sure.
Josh, we got a great question in the chat from Teresa. And I hadn't really even thought of this as well. You understand others' emotion very quickly. How well do you recognize that in yourself as these things? Are you in tune in the same way? In other words, being able to understand what you're feeling and be able to respond to that or react to that for yourself?
Yes. Well, I say that, but maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. Maybe Teresa can tell me. Maybe I'm sounding like a real jerk or something. I don't know. But yeah, I think what I recognize within myself is that I have a really patient mindset, because I try to first understand everyone else's point of view. How that manifests itself within myself is that I stay calm for a lot longer than maybe a normal person would within a situation, or I don't react instantaneously to sometimes, like, a personal example. My wife might come out and say, like, "What do you think of this?" Or, "What do you think of this outfit?" I mean, something trivial, or, "What do you think of this dinner?" Or whatever it might be. And like, I think through with patience and considering all points of view and thinking about how she feels about it before I ever respond. And because of that, sometimes I get in trouble. Sometimes I don't. But I know that myself, I'm a little bit more patient. Now, to say I have a personal or I have a perfect grasp on my own emotions, I don't think that I do. I know that I'm more patient. I know that I'm a little bit more perceptive. Um, but I don't think I have a perfect grasp on my own emotional intelligence. And I can tell you for certain that I do struggle to control my emotional feelings at certain times. But again, it's about, like, I know in what scenario that I struggle to control those.
Yeah, and I don't think she intended for a dig on that,
No.
at all. It's just
No,
kind of
no.
what's that saying? Healer, or know thyself, or heal. Sometimes it's hard to, and I didn't get that right, but sometimes we see it in others, but it's hard to see it in ourselves.
Mhm.
And I just hadn't, oftentimes, especially this season, we've been talking a lot about how these relate to how we lead, and yet they're in us as well. And so we have to kind of think, how do they affect us as well from our own performance?
Yeah, I think what I think about a lot is, um, I can feel others' feelings pretty easily in a room. Can they feel my feelings? And therefore, do I need to, like, stay super even keeled? And therefore, do I need to stay super positive? But sometimes, like, they're completely oblivious to that, which is to no fault of their own, But it's like, I have to sometimes think, like, wow, they can't feel it like I can feel it, which is totally okay and completely fine. But that I need to recognize that in and of itself.
Excellent. So it sounds like you've done a really good job reflecting on your own empathy. I can tell that you've been super thoughtful about this. Moving forward, if you were to offer advice to other leaders with empathy based on what you've learned, what would you want them to know?
Well, I think you have to build on where it is the strongest. So find out in what situations your empathy is the absolute strongest. Is it on one-on-one conversations? Is it in group settings? Is it when you approach someone new for the first time, or is it an old friendship? It can be different for everyone, but find out where it is the absolute strongest and build from that point. Create a understanding of why it's strongest at that point. And as you create that understanding of why it's strongest at that point, you can then leverage that understanding into areas where it's maybe not as strong.
That's excellent. That's sort of the idea I had when you were mentioning that connection between personal and professional life. And if you want to know how somebody leads or how somebody manages, maybe a take on that is, when is it, when are you strongest at home, and how can you do more of that at work? Or when are you strongest at work, and how can you do more of it at home?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I know I learned a lot about management just from my children. It was like, they at work they have to be civil, and at home they don't. And how you respond in those circumstances is often the true. At work you're kind of bound by some principles of things you can and can't do. At home you don't, and you really see the true side of you. So I think that for me, anyways, that gives me some great indicators. Josh, one of the things I've appreciated about you in this interview is your thoughtfulness in that. Mike and I have done a lot of these. We've interviewed a lot of people, and there's a tendency to answer questions as soon as we ask them. And I've appreciated the fact that you've kind of thought for a second and been okay with silence in that you've really kind of tried to think through these in very thoughtful ways. And so I appreciate your just your care in bringing this, bringing what we're talking about today with empathy, feeling maybe even sensing and feeling a live audience that's out there listening. And so I appreciate you bringing it. Micah, anything else you want to say as we kind of bring this in for a landing?
Josh, that's big praise, because usually I get to thank people. Jim just must have felt that from his gut, and he just couldn't avoid but tell you. So, but I do echo it. Thank you for having such a great handle on who you are, and for the great work that you do leading your team, and being brave enough to have all the feels. I think it really shows you've been an excellent poster child for empathy. So thanks for joining today.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on.
That's great to have you. Hang tight for 1 second. We'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strength Center. Send us your questions or comments, or if you'd like to be a guest blogger, we are taking those. There's actually some time. We need to build up some blogs, by the way. And so if you're thinking about writing 400 to 600 words, strengths related, and you just want to get that on a piece of paper, send that in, or piece of paper. Who's actually written something on a piece of paper?
Maybe you should write it on a piece of paper if it would get it out of your head. I did read an article today that you'll learn better in classrooms if you put away a laptop and you actually use a pen.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But either way, send us your blogs.
Send it to us, coaching@gallup.com. Put guest blogger in the subject line, and that'll get to Micah for review. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this program, as well as all the past ones. The links are all available, including a brand new social and resources page on our coach's blog. You can find that coaching.gallup.com. If you're interested in becoming a Gallup certified strengths coach, you can see a list of all the courses that lead to that available on our courses page, just courses.gallup.com. Micah, we are super close to releasing the Called the Coach that we did at the summit as well. So that'll be coming out this week. It's actually a little secret. It's actually already on the YouTube page. We just haven't made a post for it yet, but we're excited to release that Called to Coach that we did. I know many of you listened to that program as well. That's available on our YouTube page now. Just search Called to Coach on YouTube, and you can find that in the Call to Coach section. If you found this helpful, we'd ask that you share it. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. Thanks again, Josh. We'll see you here not next week, taking a week off, although if you're listening to this in a time-shifted manner, you really don't care. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Goodbye, everybody.